Hello again. Under the guise of decolonising the streets of London, all sorts of museums, streets and public spaces are being renamed. Viewers might not even notice this happening until they are presented with a fait accompli. This was the case with the Jeffrey Museum in Hackney last year. This is a museum in some old almshouses near Shoreditch, which were paid for by Robert Jeffrey, a 17th century businessman. The museum, established in the old almshouses, is a fascinating place. It contains all sorts of things relating to domestic life in Britain over the last 500 or 600 years, including recreations of homes across the centuries. After the Black Lives Matter disorders in 2020, it was decided to drop Jeffrey's name from the museum. He had interests in the slave trade in the 17th century, and so the museum was renamed the Museum of the Home. Although it is in the heart of Hackney, one doesn't actually see black people at the museum, so this move was irrelevant really from that perspective. The real aim was simply to remove an old name and replace it with something timeless and anonymous and bland. Over in Tottenham, Haringey Council is going ahead with renaming Black Boy Lane. This is being done against the wishes of the residents, who when surveyed voted overwhelmingly to retain the name. Nobody in Tottenham, I used to live in Tottenham until I came to live in Loughton. I've never once heard anybody object to Black Boy Lane. It's so ridiculous, but still. It, by the way, it has absolutely nothing at all to do with slavery or race or black boys as such. It probably refers to Charles II, who was sometimes referred to as the Black Boy because of his dark complexion. Another part of English history being removed simply for the sake of it. The eventual aim in Haringey is to rename Black Boy Lane Le Rose Lane, after a guy from Trinidad who started a left-wing bookshop in Haringey. In the description to this video I give a link to a bit about this idiotic move. Over in Southall, Havelock Road has been changed to Guru Nanak Road. Ealing Council decided that General Havelock was an awful example of a British imperialist soldier, and so they would instead prefer a street named after the 16th century founder of the Sikh religion. A bit more of London's history removed. Which brings us to the London Borough of Brent, which is keen to change the name of Gladstone Park. William Gladstone was the Prime Minister of Britain on 4 separate occasions, and is of course a very famous Englishman. The sudden desire of the council, led by a man called Muhammed, who may be seen in the thumbnail to this video, to change the name of the park is yet one more deliberate attempt to erase this country's history and replace it with something to do with foreigners or immigrants. The ostensible reason for doing this, by the way, is because Gladstone's father had business in the slave trade, but there we are. Brent Council hired a so-called race expert called Ing Dornan, and he was given access to schools in the borough to spread his poison. The children were taught about systemic racism and the death of George Floyd, and in that context were then asked what they thought the park should be renamed. After the sessions of indoctrination, it will surprise nobody that they came up with various politically correct ideas such as diversity fields or multi-faith park. And no, I'm not making that up. I'll give a link to a news item about it in the description to this video. Diversity fields. My own suspicion is that it was not the children who came up with such weird ideas, but probably the teachers who are in the main death-ring troublemakers. Perhaps the most bizarre idea which was generated by the schools was that it should be renamed Diane Abbot Park. What on earth that woman has ever done worthy to be commemorated is an interesting point indeed. The real motive behind these moves, and this is becoming quite a thing lately, is to remove our history and try to restart it from scratch. It's a bit like year zero when the Khmer Rouge took control of Cambodia. I've only given a few examples, but this is spreading wider and wider. The Mayor of London, Sadiq Khan, is behind the moves in London. He's set up a decolonising fund of £1 million worth of council taxpayers' money, and then encouraged local authorities to start dismantling the history of the capital. It's all very expensive, but since it's being paid for by the council taxpayers, I suppose that doesn't really matter. Whole districts are due to be removed, such as Tulse Hill in South London, which was named after somebody with links to the slave trade. So far, 45 streets are being prepared for name changes, and the whole thing has gained an impetus of its own. The irony is, of course, that this is really the reverse of decolonisation. London has, in effect, been colonised, and it is the colonisers who are behind the drive to change the names of the streets so that they reflect the tradition of the new colonisers, rather than those of the old inhabitants. How else to explain ditching Havelock Road in favour of Guru Nanak Road in a largely Sikh area? This then is the future of London. Not only are the people changing, but the very fabric of the city is being renamed and altered.